Cloud. All right, so we're talking today about account management, and this was an article that just came out. And ironically, Phyllis, this is a feature um, that just came out. Uh, and yeah, so
Not a bug.
from the Microsoft says it has no plans to change remote login protocol in Windows that allow people to log into machines using passwords that have been revoked. By the way, this is a feature. Um, John, did you see this?
Yeah, we've known about this for a while. The okay, so look, this goes into the category of like forever days. And it's one of those things where one of the ways that you could used to be able to attack if I stole a notebook computer from a place is I could take that computer, start it up away from any associated domain controller, and I could brute force the passwords on that system all day long with no repercussions of being locked out. And that's part of the reason why, it's not going to do it unless it can confirm it with the domain controller. So basically, if you could try to hit a system as hard as you could outside of a domain controller authentication perspective, it would basically allow you to do as many failed login attempts as you wanted, just as long as it wasn't connected to a domain. And Microsoft does look at this as a feature, not a bug. I honestly, this is a really, really, really hard one for me to understand. Um, because if the domain is saying that the password has been revoked or expired or whatever, that should hold true, right? All the way through. So I don't know. I'm keep on trying to like stand up for Microsoft because they used to be one of the best large scale secure code development type companies. And just lately, they just seem to be making more and more unforced errors and mistakes like this. And it's almost like they're becoming a little Oracle-like, where they're almost hostile to the rest of the security community, trying to get them to get some stuff fixed.
Yeah, interesting. So I put that in chat for everybody. One more, and then we'll get into some Q&A with you guys. I thought this was interesting. Again, the reason, talking about account management, and because we're going to actually have Philip Langlois from Verizon, the Verizon data breach report on the cyber call Monday. He comes every year. Good friends with Phyllis, used to work with Phyllis at CIS. But again, John, this is, here we go with obviously credentials being, increasingly this was a third party, right, where the credentials were found, and which led to Ascension's data breach. Now, what's interesting is I'm going to give you guys a quick visual. This came from the Verizon DBIR. Not surprisingly, the percent of third parties that are, that are leading to breaches doubled year over year. That's
Yeah.
a big number from a
This
percent.
this this was both of my talks centered around this challenge at RSA.
Did it?
One being around shared responsibility in third-party supply chain risk, right? Is the fact that if you don't say you're responsible for this specifically, then it may not happen, right? That kind of situation. And then the second one is just about the plight of the SMB and the extensibility of how much harder it is to do the same job than enterprise spending 7% of their budget of their top line revenue versus an SMB spending 7% of their top line revenue at 500,000, right? So, but that doesn't surprise me, Andrew, that you're seeing this third party supply chain risk turn into larger incidents.
Well, and the story that we've been following kind of on MySpace is the U.S. Bank OCC breach, where the Office of Comptroller of Currency under the Treasury Department had one of their accounts compromised, and then it led to a breach of a bunch of U.S. Bank information. But this is one of the reasons why we're using Flare for our MDR service and what we're doing. And granted, that's not going to catch everything in all situations, but these third-party breaches, and then info stealer logs. Matt, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about info stealer logs, but
Ugh.
instead of looking at it as just a large scale breach, there's a whole bunch of people that are compromising tons and tons of individual workstations, and then you can buy that information off of those systems. And if
Yeah.
they're connecting into your customers or into your work computer, it's not the same thing as a huge breach, but it adds up in massive, massive ways.
and initial compromise, right? Like when you think about it, both sides of it. There was a talk at about info stealers at B-Side San Francisco this last week that was really delving into that challenge, John. I mean, I don't know if you caught that one or not, but Raccoon and any of the others that have been taking Redline in its takedown, but others have popped back up. There's like 12 more or something after that. And so the problem is they're going and capturing credentials. And I have a friend of mine, Britton White, that just literally takes and posts them when he buys samples or is in some, he's infiltrated a few Telegram channels, and he posts them and tells people and reaches out to those people about it. But some of them are CISOs. There's been Change Healthcare creds were in there. I mean, all kinds of stuff. And so if you think about that initial access broker, that's probably coming from an info stealer, from a methodology of access, right? And John, Andrew, this leads right into our conversation today around identities and around Control 5 and in CIS. But a lot of people are storing those accounts in their personal browsers, right? In the Cisco Talos write-up, the Talos write-up of the Cisco breach in 2022, they spoke towards the original piece of that was some numpty was storing his work credentials in his Google account for his personal account, right? For the VPN. That was the initial access of
No,
that
I'm
that's spoken
listening to
towards
something
the
from
space. So, Justin,
CIS.
Yeah.
what's up, Justin?
What's up,
Anyways, just saying,
Justin?
hey.
That's
Gotta-
awesome.
I gotta be-
That's
All
awesome.
right.
When he says hi. All right.
All right, so I know Phyllis has got to head out at a quarter
Yeah,
of it.
sorry.
That's okay. So John, let's start at the top. Why do you believe Control 5 account management is still one of the most overlooked areas in cybersecurity, and especially in our space, SMB, MSP?
So
Or it was the ubiquitous, by the way.
yeah, anywhere, right? So I keep coming back to that top 100 vulnerabilities that we discovered. And whenever I sat down and started talking to my testers about this specific one, right? Pretty much any of them that deal with accounts or creds, like default creds or insecure storage of creds, Kerber roastable creds, service accounts, being accessible to any user in the environment. Like those are access level vulnerabilities, right? So if you go back to that spreadsheet, and I can share it up again. If you go back to that spreadsheet,
I got it right here.
any,
So
yeah, go ahead, and if you want to share that out, I went through and I did some color coding. And it's kind of one of those things. I think I just stumbled into something stupid, and it's like maybe more valuable than I think it was as far as information. So if you're looking at anything that's gold, I went through and kind of set up these kind of deal with this control. User enumeration, I know that doesn't seem like that's directly accessible to this, but it is. In most organizations, if I can harvest around 1,200 users, I'm going to be able to gain access through a password spraying attack, if no two-factor is enabled, right? And we'll talk more about that as well. Missing authentication, password reuse, password policy exceptions, because there's always exceptions, lack of multi-factor, any of these that are gold, talking to my testers, like we got into companies doing that. So you have 30 companies, we got access to systems through default credentials. We had 22 where default credentials were enabled, 17 privileged accounts missing from protected users group. So these are things like we're not just talking about like SSL TLS where it's like, yeah, an auditor may not like that. No, these are straight initial access operation level things. And I think that's why it's so high in the critical controls, right? So when we're looking at it and we're looking at the idea of credentials, it is absolutely one of the very first things that we go about testing. Now, I strongly encourage you, if you want to learn how to do this as part of your CIS class, you have my entire intro to pen testing class. And in there, I've got a section called Things That Will Kill You. Password spraying is one of them. This is not something that some general script kiddie that just got out of high school or college can do these attacks against an organization successfully. You will lock out systems, you will lock out accounts, you will absolutely burn things to the ground, or you're just going to be horrible at it. And you're not going to gain access if you do it improperly. I'll give you an example. SSH, we had talked about that a little bit last week. On most of the password spraying tools and password attack tools, they run about 30, 36 threads. That means it's concurrently trying to log in 36 times. Anything over 3 or 4 for SSH goes into a defensive crouch position, and you cannot authenticate even if it's nothing but valid user IDs and passwords all day long. It just kind of shuts itself down. So it's kind of like a fail secure DOS condition that exists in SSH servers. So the reason why I'm talking about this is many organizations that do testing, they don't test for these things correctly. They don't find these vulnerabilities, and these vulnerabilities persist until a really good attacker does come along and gain access to them. So this is one of those bread and butter things. It's awesome because it doesn't use a buffer overflow, heap overflow, anything like that. It's just coming in at it with creds.
Got it, John. So Phyllis, inventory, fun times for MSPs. We love our
Oh,
inventories.
I'm coming back to this one after Phyllis talks about it.
Right.
Yeah.
So, inventories being foundational for CIS. Can you give some advice on how organizations can practically build and maintain accurate inventories of accounts, including users, service,
Right.
accounts, etc.?
Yeah, I want to play off what John said, which is what I love. He said, it's nothing fancy,
Yeah.
Mhm.
right? I don't need to, know how to, do buffer overflows, stack canaries. I don't need to know any of that stuff. All I need to do, not all, I mean, I know it's very difficult. We hear that all the time, is really have an really think about those policies that you need in place, right? So, the first thing is like there's privileged accounts and non-privileged accounts, right? And you have to document those. What rights do we want each of those kinds of accounts to have? You have to go through and you have to have your onboarding. These are the permissions people need. These are, explicitly give people permissions. You've got those policies. One of the ones like admins, if you have a privileged account, you only use it for things that you need privilege with, right? So these are policies that you need to have in place so people in your organization know um, what they can and cannot do. Additionally, it seems most people are pretty good at onboarding, but then there's the offboarding, right? You have to have policies for offboarding. If I leave, all my accounts get disabled. Everything that I have access to needs to be disabled, all those things. So you really need to think this through. Additionally, as we've been talking, as you showed, um, from the Verizon data breach report, it's not just on-prem accounts, right? Everyone's in a hybrid environment. What we need to do is look at accounts that we have on all our SaaS apps, who's managing those, who has privilege, so on and so forth. So it's cumbersome. It's
Phyllis,
super easy.
before you go, Matt, I just want to add one thing. So you mentioned onboarding, offboarding, and critical. There's thank goodness there's starting to become automation solutions like Roost
Yes.
that do help. But one thing that I remember when you, me, and Ryan Weeks and Wes did the podcast, we also talked about change, meaning Phyllis used to be in this role, now she's in this role. Can you
Yeah.
just highlight that a little bit also?
Yeah, you definitely also, as part of your policy, excuse me, have to define those roles that people within organizations have, right? So software devs, of course, want all the privileges. You have to keep that in check. But who needs access to what and what is their role? So one day I'm working in finance. Maybe I move over to HR. When my role changes, I don't need access to certain things, but I may need access to other things. And so you do have to take into account when folks move from one organization or one part of the organization to another part of the organization. That role-based access control is not just can I technically implement it, but what policies do I have in place to make sure that we are implementing those changes.
Yeah, good stuff. John, you said you wanted to jump in on this.
Yeah, I've got two things. And I'm hoping Phyllis can kind of help me with the first one, and the second one is just a bit of a gripe. But the first thing is the 14 and 8 rule, like as far as password complexity, where if you have multi-factor, it's 8, if it's 14. And I was really on board with that. When it first came out, it was kind of rewarding people for doing two-factor authentication. However, with our customers and kind of what we're seeing is that 8-character password rule with multi-factor only works if they have multi-factor enabled for absolutely everything, that there's no sidechain API that bypasses the need for having multi-factor. And effectively, in the vast majority of our organizations that have kind of adopted that rule, we found a place where we can still authenticate without multi-factor authentication.
Yep.
And it's one of those things where I desperately want it to be true, that 8 and 14, and I just don't ever see it being true in organizations, because conceptually it's like, yes, you know, if you have MFA everywhere, it's going to make it much, 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 much more difficult to get into an organization. However, I just don't see that showing up. And I kind of want to, you know, we're talking going back to 1 and 2, we're talking about inventory of users, all of these things. I guess it's kind of a question for me, how do we reconcile this moving forward? I think the guidance stands and the guidance makes sense, but I think that everyone wants to default to say, yeah, we've got MFA over there, so therefore we're good. It's 8-character passwords, and the reality is just not there at all.
So I'll follow up with that. So the NIST guidance, the NIST updated guidance is, excuse me, 8-character password as long as it's computer generated and truly random. So the data shows that a person who has like a 14, 16-character password does not have any more entropy than an 8-character password. Because what the data is showing, that when users create a 14 to 16-character password, they repeat. It's like Phyllis number 1, Phyllis number 1, you know, Phyllis number 1, bang, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And so, you know, the data is showing, and that's why NIST pushed out that updated guidance. And so, you know, the 8-character password is that, in theory, humans can memorize a truly random 8-character password. It's not going to be Phyllis number 1, 2, 3, or whatever. It'll be computer generated, but you can't really memorize a computer generated, truly random 14 to 16-character password.
Got it. Matt, talk to us about, you know, the risk of dormant and off accounts, and, you know, your approach in making sure these are deactivated.
Yeah, I mean, first, do you mind if I, for just a second, kind of highlight and kind of foot stomp to steal Lawrence Cruciano's term? It's going to stick in my head now forever.
Oh, go do your thing.
All the things that John and Phyllis were bantering back and forth about are in these visuals. Like when you talk about an inventory of account, we're saying that 6.1, establish an access granting process. 6.2, establish an access revoking process. Each of those are going to pull data from this inventory of accounts and in some ways write data back, right? Like now it's dormant. I need to kill this account. I need to address it, things like that. So I like to think of the inventory of accounts as a working document that I function from. Meaning that if it was Excel, it would just have tons of columns that I would have data points and attributes in that allow me to sort or set automations upon, things to that nature that allow me to do that, right? But in this inventory, John had mentioned software. Well, 2.1 needs to be read from to figure out where identities might exist. 1.1 needs to be read from to figure out what systems exist, what local admin accounts might exist, the local account on your phone, the local account on the machine, the network device, all those things. So just remember the breadth of how big 5 is. Don't let it drown you. But just in this conversation, you have to think how broad it really is when we think about all that. The other thing that, John, you said was people leave up access to attack themselves in those 8 characters accidentally. That was one of our findings in the hackening. We found an LDAP-S endpoint that someone set up for their company portal that let me circumvent all the Microsoft protections on those accounts to figure out which ones were valid and then sign into Microsoft across that, right? So that kind of stuff that exists, I agree with you on that. Your question, though, is talking about, Andrew, 5.3, which is a piece of management to help you not shoot yourself in the foot. It's really to say, if you have all this list of accounts, try to figure out when someone's not signing in. Why do you think that's happening, John? Why do we want to know when somebody's not signed in 45 days?
Really, because that's just, once again, it's a stale account. And I always use an example of like a snowball, but made of poop. The more you let this stuff go, the bigger the ball of poop gets over time. And it's just going to be a matter of time before we start nailing those accounts and coming after them.
So what you have to do is first determine that they're stale, correct? Would everybody agree that's the first step that must happen, is I have to find a stale account? There's a lot of ways to do that with Microsoft, but most of them require a P2 or greater even license, potentially. Let's just focus on one of the places accounts exist, Entra. I think that's a high risk, high likelihood, right, space. Wouldn't you agree, John, to start with? Is that?
Absolutely. Because that's where I'm going right there. Because it's
Yeah,
exposed,
100
open. Yep.
Absolutely. So that's how I'd also add to this, Andrew, is when you're going through this as a practitioner, there's thousands of things you could do. Focus on the ones that probably kill you first, as John said in his what will kill you quickly. And so I'd think the higher risk applications like Microsoft. So in this case, Microsoft says you can go in and do a report ultimately. So at the very bare minimum, you can go in and do a manual report and add in a last interactive sign-in time column that allows you to filter for last interactive sign-in time and manually do it. If you are doing this on the one scale, that isn't all that hard to do, right? Is this manual? I mean, if you had 1 million users like McDonald's, maybe that's a problem. And it just says disable or delete whenever where supported. So it doesn't actually even give you a cadence for that, Phyllis, right? Like in this control, it doesn't say every week, every month, right? Like we might see in some of the others there. So it's kind of up to you to decide more quarterly or more frequently for the inventory, but I would be way more frequent on dormant accounts, and I would probably build it up automatically if I could. Go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, so I want to ask maybe like if Eric, I don't know if Roder can come off mute, but like Eric, when I was talking to Ryan Weeks, he would at data, one of the things that really bothered him back in the day was he would see, for their, critical systems that customers are using, like accounts that were at 45 days old, completely dormant. And he made a conscious decision to start whacking accounts, just because of the risk. In your, how you do your shared responsibility with your clients, like, do you say, hey, if I see something for this period of time, it's getting deleted? I don't, just for security. Do you go to that?
Not deleted necessarily. Sorry, I'll shut up.
I want to jump in real quick though. You do have to be careful with this, and I think this is where Matt was going to go. If you just go in and just start whacking accounts, we have seen a number of organizations that have service accounts that are in the user OU. So like you should never do that. Like you should never do that. But if you have last password change and you're just like, well, this hasn't changed in 180 days, I'm going to disable this account. You might want to ask some questions first. And do some auditing and figure out where that account is actually being logged in from. Is
it a break glass account that needs to stay dormant, right? That if I kill it, we're in real trouble. Yeah.
But Matt, we've seen accounts where it's like, what is the Jim Bob 42 account? Kill it. And it's like, well, that was Jim Bob's account that he used for managing all the SQL servers. You just shut our entire environment down.
So let's go to Eric, real world, that you're doing as an MSP.
We have a, part of our TAM or technology alignment management process is we just review those accounts with clients. We just pull a list of anything that hasn't been actively logged into. Some tools are making that easier, SIP and some other things. But yeah, we make them justify, should we keep this account if it hasn't been logged into in 90 days or something along those lines. Yeah. I don't know the exact parameters, but we do take a conscious effort in making them justify any accounts that are dormant. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is that I'm always shocked, like Zapier, right? Like I looked at it, I tried something 4 years ago and it didn't work. And now full circle come around, I need to try some other new something automation. And I go get in and that account's still there. So then it's like, oh, shame on me. I should have done something to go and nuke that account. And like, it scares me to death thinking what accounts are out there that are still dormant 4 years later, right?
I have a question, Eric. How often do you have those meetings with your clients to go over accounts?
It's all based on size. So they get more revenue dollars for technology alignment management based on the size of their company. So the smaller ones, maybe twice a year. The large ones, it could be, I have a really large account that we meet. I do stuff behind the scenes every week, but we meet every 2 weeks. So, it just kind of depends on the frequency. And I hate to use dollars as the frequency, but it does, you'd have to pay for the stuff.
Yeah.
It is very manual, if you will, to make them justify, because I don't know Jim Bob's if he really should be in there or not. Usually it's like the owner's son that comes in every summer, but you better not delete that account, so.
And that's where supported comes into play. I would document what that account is, document its cadence, right, in that Excel sheet on that identity document, and say, hey, this is Jim Bob's account. He comes in every summer. Maybe we come up with an idea of we disable it until he's back in next summer, right? And we don't kill the account, and that's also why that disable or delete. The other thing I was going to add back to your initial question, Andrew, is like, if I was doing this today, I would automate this probably. There are dynamic groups that Microsoft does call out for this, where you can make that attribute be one of the dynamic group attributes, hasn't signed in X period of time. And then that group I might use with a script that auto disables any users in that group and notifies the admin of that, right? So you could take that as an automated methodology to put this forward, is how I might tackle that.
That's a really good point. I think, so just talking products for a second, I think, Matt, and that's coming online to your line card any day now is the Netrix One Secure. I think that is some of the things that they do. I remember 5-6 years ago when you met Ken Tripp and when, they're obviously a great player in the mid-market enterprise space. And you had like, yeah, we have about 300-400 MSPs that use us. And you're like, wow, you got a lot of nerve not being multi-tenanted, but he listened to you.
I did punch him pretty hard, if I recall. Thanks for
but
bringing up old times.
Yeah, I think tools like that now are helping with that automation and auditing. So one more for you, Matt. Let's talk passwords, even with MFA adoption. I know you'd be shocked. We use passwords, right? Or Matt 123, and we'll just do Matt 123 exclamation next. They still persist. But we'll talk about password management strategies, and hopefully we're all using password management. And John, once Matt talks, I still remember, one of my favorite videos of you is doing passphrases. And so I'd love your take on that as well, but go ahead, Matt.
Go ahead, Matt. You take it first.
Yeah, real quick. This is one of those times where sometimes it helps to read all of CIS before you implement and go down a path, in my opinion. This is my opinion, so take it for what it's worth in front of the person who created them, so no pressure. So centralize account management through a directory of identity service, especially for you as an MSP. I personally don't believe there's any reason that I would be using username and passwords for the most part. Now, they might exist for things, but not many, right? And more, in fact, in our hackening study, we found 80% of those MSPs were on just a single Entra ID or Octo, or a couple of people were on multiple IDPs that were chained together. But if I was to start with an identity provider first and an SSO, and almost everything in my design constraints that I reach out to has to have SSO and no actual local passwords for my users, then I can get it down to where I have one battle line to fight on. I'm fighting on the battle lines of identity. I know where to fight. I know what the guns will be pointed at me. I know how to protect them, and I know how to make better decisions, leading me to a point where I could have a very memorizable 75-character password if I wanted. That's a phrase that allows me access into all those things and resources. And then the rest of it becomes conditions upon that access. Is my device healthy? Does it have an anti-malware? Does it have all those types of things that start letting me have better control of that once I have that first identity sorted? And as I escalate risk, like I'm accessing my RMM, I might make it to where you have much higher levels of conditional access that you have to have than if you're accessing just email. And I don't mean just, and somebody could fight me to death on that one. I get where I could be.
Interesting what Nat said. When I was just at Kaseya Connect, and if you ever heard Double Secret Octopus, but
I remember them.
Double
managed Okta, I think, or something. They did a overwrap layer of some other commercial service, if I remember.
They play way up.
Digress.
They're finally, to Net's point, passwordless solution coming.
So back to your question then on these managing passwords and how one would do that is now you have an identity source that you could actually sign into a password manager by that identity source and then use those passwords in stored fashion, like John said, of random characters to be very random, to Phyllis's point of 8 character if you were going to do that. But why wouldn't you just use 20 characters when you're just copying, pasting out of a password manager? In my opinion, that makes it to where, and John, you can actually just jump from here and take the floor. But once you define us as SSO as my battle zone, it gets a lot more linear on how I fight than if I had passwords sprayed everywhere and having to be managed. But that's pretty much it. Yeah.
John, let me say one thing before you talk, because the lead into that video, and I will see if I can find it and send it to everybody. You were on this gentleman was interviewing you 5, 6, 7 years. I forget what it was. And he said, if there was one control that you can only have one, you said strong passwords. And then you went into passphrases. Can you unpack it a little bit?
So whenever we're looking at passphrases, and this ties into SSO, I mean, whenever you're looking at authentication in Windows environments, if you go right down to the bottom, right, it's gonna have an NT and a landman password hash. Now, you can argue with that, but it's always going to come down to that type of authentication because that's what all of Microsoft is built around. And Microsoft is built around Kerberos and LDAP, and then you just stick a whole bunch of things on top of it all the way around it. So when we're looking at this, like whenever we're breaking into environments, and this gets into like the 8-character password thing. If I get into your environment with the user account and I'm able to dump those password hashes, I'm going to crack 90% of your passwords. I don't care how randomly generated they are. I'm going to crack 90% of them. True statement. Now, if you have passphrases and you start going into like the correct horse battery staple type realm, and once again, don't use that passphrase. We're not going to crack nearly that many, right? There's going to be some phrases that we may use like season and year, something like that, or variations thereof. And we're going to get some level of access, but we're not going to get like absolute dominating access to the entire environment. We had a company that we were testing a while ago, like a home, like well-known brand, and they said that they were in compliance with PCI and they used 8-character passwords. Actually, it's not true. They were using 7 characters. That's what PCI required at the time because clearly PCI looked at the standards from 1985 and they said, whoa, pump the brakes there, buddy. Let's back up to 7. And we were able to crack 98% of their passwords in their environment. It's critical vulnerability. They said, no, you can't make that a critical vulnerability. I asked why. And they said, because we're in compliance. I'm like, oh, well, there you go. Right. So when Matt's talking about this and you're talking about this presentation, go to 20, go to 21, just 15 or higher at least. Because if you're running 14-character passwords, if you have landman enabled anywhere at all, which we still see to this day for reverse compatibility, then you actually don't have 14-character passwords. You actually have 7-character passwords because of the way landman breaks the passwords up. So this is a lot of legacy stuff. I really like what Matt was talking about, though, from the cloud perspective of enabling single sign-on when you're dealing with cloud. I have one place to defend at that point. And I love that analogy, right? We can start putting our protections around that. We can start saying, what are the services that are allowed to authenticate in? What are the apps that we are allowed to install on our phones and our mobile devices? And what are the permissions that they have? It's kind of funny. Everyone jokes about cloud computing and they're like, oh, cloud computing is just somebody else's computer. And do you really trust Microsoft? Yes. Yes, I do. I trust Microsoft much more than on-prem Exchange. I trust Microsoft much more than everyone having their own Active Directory environments and they're all managing them in completely different ways. And that's coming from an attacker, right? If anybody is like, well, we haven't really migrated much to the cloud, it's going to be a cakewalk. If somebody's moving it to the cloud, it's continuously getting more and more difficult with the techniques that are out there. And what we're seeing is it is absolutely possible to try to lock down your cloud instance to be MFA attack and bypass resistant. You can do those things. But what I'm discovering with Microsoft at the moment is they have all these great security features that you can turn on, but they're not on by default because they're a pain in the ass and they will break things. So we're getting to the point in the industry as a whole where there's a lot of security configurations that you can put in that'll shut down a lot of these attacks, but then you just get hit by the bus of reality in a lot of organizations where you cannot turn them on absolutely everything. But I love Matt's approach. It's like, let's at least get to one battle line. Can we at least get to one place instead of having authentication in Google and in Amazon and in Okta and in Office 365 and then local authentication? Let's get to try to establish our battle lines. But if we can choose where that is, we have a much better shot at winning.
I made a statement to the CISO of Sony last night, or whatever, it doesn't matter, yesterday something.
And a long week, dude.
It's been a long week. And I thought I was going to get laughed at, but I really wanted to test it in a big audience. This guy's also former DoD CISO, right? So pretty well-known individual, and he was going to laugh at me if I was stupid. But I made an argument and said, small to mid-sized business security, in my opinion, cybersecurity, will outpace enterprise in the next 5 years. And he asked me a clarifying question. What do you mean by outpace? And I said, from a perspective of reduction of harm. And the reason I said this is most of you are code consuming entities. For the most part, in the SMB, I am using SaaS or some shitty line of business application I might be stuck with. And based on that difference, if I am now identity only, extensible into SaaS, I can now have a single plane of which we manage. But also, I go from Server 2003, 8, 8R2, 12, 12R2, 16, 19, Force Function 2003, 8, 8R2, 12. So all the things John's talking about is IPv6 on. Can I do these to now just Graph API? Which means now I can query that at scale, I can find problems at scale, and I can fix them. And Microsoft made evidence of this yesterday or 2 days ago. They pushed out a new CA policy that looks for device code logons. Why? Because Bo Bullock wrote a dope-ass tool for attacking people and testing device code flows, right? It's called Graph Runner, and it's amazing. And so the point is like, you now see these mass inoculations that can also happen. And to your point, John, I'm really just reinforcing your point of, if I'm running my own AD server, I am the only smart guy in the room that's responsible for my own death or not. With Graph, we can have large community type things like Cloud Capsule, and there's tons of them out there that are doing automation of what settings should be good. Even Phyllis, to your point, the ability to run benchmarks, and that benchmark now applies ubiquitously towards CA setups, potentially, let's say. It's amazing what that can do at scale for that. So that's my statement, John, is that we'll see the SMB side outpace those legacy a brownfield operation in enterprise.
I'm going to say it's already happening. When I'm like looking at a lot of the MSPs and like their ability to react at scale, dealing with breaches in multiple different locations, dealing with a variety of breaches, like I look at it as, like you use a horrible analogy of Dune, right? The MSPs have been the Furmen that have been running around in the desert for 1,000 years. And all of a sudden, they've gotten really good at fighting these pitched battles with these attacks because they've been on the front lines in ways that a lot of large scale enterprises haven't.
So Phyllis, I know you got a jet. Can you do one last thing, or do you got to run?
Yeah, sure. No, I can stay on a little bit longer.
Oh, okay, okay. So I want to ask John something, but let me jump to you so you can at least get some airtime. I'm going to come back to John. So can you talk about, in Control 5 with CIS about limiting administrative privileges and, by role, by function, when people come to you for help and you will consult with a lot of organizations, what do you talk about? How do you help them?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, the number one thing and the reason why, we actually have to call out admin privileges in that control is because there are so many errors, right? It is very convenient when you're an admin. I'm just here. I need to research something. I'm just going to surf the internet, right? And so you really have to be disciplined in only using that privileged account for only privileged activities. We're all human. It's hard, but that's like the easiest way that attackers can get in by taking advantage of those privileged accounts. Same thing with developer accounts, right? All software devs are like, well, I need this privilege, I need this, I need that, and the other. And then, oh, I need to go out on the internet and I need to get this open source thing. I need to look up this thing on maybe, Stack Overflow. I need to get all this access, right? And what we've seen, and even what I saw at the NSA, is that some of the biggest attacks that we've seen have gotten in because of those developers. And because what organizations, I'll say one step further, what organizations fail to do is separate their the dev network from the production network, right? And so you saw that a few years ago with the big RSA compromise. And so, again, it's can you be disciplined enough to separate out that role and only do privileged functions, not be connected perhaps to the network if you're a dev, but those admins have to be, and that's their function.
Yeah.
I know it's hard, especially, we just saw the RDP. We're in a hybrid environment, maybe admins are coming in remotely, but as John and everyone has said on this call, then you also need that MFA in place.
So John, in your work with incident response, let's talk mismanaged service accounts. If you recall, Okta's most recent one about, I don't know, 7, 8, maybe a year ago, that one. How often are you seeing that in your attacks?
It's funny. We still see it constantly, but we've seen a shift in the way that my attackers are approaching that. Um, we joked about it once, I think it was last year. I gave a presentation and I was talking about how we used an on-prem chatbot to compromise their API keys. I think it was for Amazon, I'm not sure. And basically just by asking it, it's like, hey, where are the API keys at? And it's like, it's over here on this GitHub server. And we're like, great. How do we get access to that GitHub server? Well, the GitHub server grants you access based on your role in the company and this particular user portal. You could go and change your role to whatever you wanted, put an admin in there, and then you could gain access to everything. That was funny. We're still doing it. And this is one of those areas where we're kind of seeing this collision, and we're talking about services, right? I think, we can talk about it as traditional services like Kerberoastable style services. We're still seeing those at a very high clip, right? But we're also seeing it where we're getting access to API keys for services, where you have, a secret private key, and it's this really long string of garbage that'll basically, it's a password that you're using to gain access to things remotely. And that seems to be accelerating. And that's specifically in large scale enterprises. And the reason why it's accelerating in large scale enterprises is because this amount of integration that we're seeing with cloud services is just exploding. And people are just kind of treating these different API keys. They're not treating them as very sensitive security-based secrets. And I think part of that's like, it's a key, it's not a password. And humans have been trained, oh, don't share your password, but you can still give your key away for a bar of chocolate. I don't quite know where I'm going with this, but the point is, we are seeing the idea of services. We're still seeing Kerberoastable service accounts, and we are still absolutely seeing this huge exploitation and explosion of different API keys that are getting easier and easier to find in environments these days.
Well, not to mention, not to go off on a tangent, John, but the talk I'm doing at Wild West Tacken Fest is giving swords to our AI overlords and talking about MCP abuse vis-a-vis extensibility to those API keys, where I don't even need the key. I'm just going to use the service to do what I want to do for me for that.
Or just
for that
ask
piece,
it
right?
to do it on your behalf.
Exactly,
Right?
exactly.
Yeah.
So that's going to be a fun talk.
What about
anyways.
John, enforcing, expiration? Like
Oh, dude.
Yeah.
Okay. So that gets into your CI/CD pipeline, right? We just had this happen at BHIS literally last week, where we had one of our developers of our continuous attack surface management service, who built a bunch of our automation. He decided to leave and start his own company, coincidentally doing security automation services. A little bit weird that, but I'm supportive of him. Good for him. Go get it. But he leaves, and we had an API that just expired like a week later. And we ran into that problem where as soon as that person left, where was that API in the code? And because it was his code and didn't have really strong DevOps, it wasn't in a config file somewhere. It was buried in the code in a specific location. So yeah, I mean, when we're talking about this, I think the practicalities and the realities of the situation are far more difficult if you don't have good CI/CD pipeline and DevSecOps when you're doing development.
Got it.
All of the Control 16 stuff we're going to talk about, right? And to
Yeah, which
Phyllis's
should move
points
up
earlier,
further, I think.
yeah,
But
yeah.
it's a different time now. Things have changed a lot. I think we'd all agree in the past 12 to 15 months in the industry writ large.
So, hey, Eric, I was going to ask Matt this in a minute, but I want to ask you, what about in general centralizing this? Because you align this to IG1 to most of your clients, if not all of them now, and have a shared responsibility. But how about at scale? Like, how are you centrally managing account management, and is it possible, or is it just?
So the smaller the client, the more difficult. In some respects, it really depends on their apps, right? So if they're using very off-the-shelf name brand apps, it's far more feasible than they're using Joe's concrete bidding SaaS tool, right? Like trying to centralize any kind of SSO or anything there. That's where, well, I guess we're going to still have a password manager on top of SSO and kind of talk through that. So, man, even here at ProTech, like we have over 100 SaaS tools, and we can't. I mean, there's MSP tools that still can't be SSP.
Wait, is that 100 that you're supporting for your customers or 100 that you're using?
It's a little of both, right? We're just really tight about our vendor management, and so like that's Grammarly, that's like it is any SaaS
Yeah.
app that we touch, right?
We had
So
67, John, that we defined at Integris at the time, or Iconic at the time.
Wow.
So for Eric, I'm wondering, is even centralization across your customers for account management? Is that possible up a level?
Man,
That's
oh my God.
we're fighting for that. I wouldn't say we're there.
it would only be doable if almost everything was modern, right? Because if you can make one kind of service principal, one kind of account, and even then you're having to round off the edges of local devices on IoT, devices on network. Like, I don't think you could ever get to truly centralized at the grandfather level of father and child, in my opinion.
I don't think we're going to get there, right? I mean, if you look at
I don't-
Microsoft as an operating system, it's just a bag of drivers and reverse compatibility. And we're seeing that in the cloud. It's just, I, yeah, Grammarly is a keystroke logger, right?
Yeah,
I
had to heart that.
I'm going to have to heart that too. When you're looking at all of this, like the practicalities, like looking on large scale enterprises, they don't even know all the apps that they're using, right?
Nope.
And I can only imagine how much worse that is for an MSP, MSSP, who's dealing with 100 customers and all of their stray cats that they're working with in the cloud.
Probably my biggest pet peeve, if I could just throw on my pet peeve here, is all these MSP tools. They're created by SaaS companies that are all on Macs and they're all in Google. And they just figure that the rest of the world is all on Macs and all on Google. And they have Google SSO and Facebook SSO, but no Microsoft SSO. And it's just like, what are
Doc Hub. Doc Hub. You can log in with Google, you can log in with Facebook. I think they even have Instagram. And it's like, what about this thing called Microsoft?
Yeah,
It's
what
like,
about OAuth for Microsoft? That one's got a little bit of market share, just this much.
And it's literally like just a little bit of depth, dude. From your lips to God's
Trigger
ears,
moment.
man.
Trigger moment.
Well, it's interesting, Eric, you mentioned SaaS and the amount of apps. So Phyllis, are you still with us, by the way?
Phyllis made it back.
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, we had a power outage. It stormed and then the power went out. So
Okay, well,
Happy to have you back.
so
Thanks.
let's talk about, SaaS, when you talk about cloud adoption and the, obviously the acceleration of it, how are you recommending we, look at that area and changes and additions and, when it comes to this control?
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely looking at that, especially given the data, as seen in the, excuse me, VDBIR that you flashed up in the beginning. And this kind of brings in, excuse me, Control
Bless you.
15, thank you, with the service provider management. And no offense to MSPs or any service provider, this whole shared service model is, we kind of chuckle at it because it's not really shared. It's what you pay for, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, but the other one sounds better, Phyllis.
it
does
does
sound
it does-
nicer.
It does sound nicer. And what we want to tell organizations is, you need to make sure that your service provider is helping you with your inventory.
Can I tackle Andy's
Right.
question too? Whenever after that, sorry.
That's a
I didn't-
great question.
What
Yeah.
was the question? I
So
can't-
the question is 100% SSO truly the goal, though? I want to tackle it first, if you guys don't mind.
Go ahead.
And then it says, I can see benefits of keeping certain things out of band to limit potential blast radius. Admittedly, though, that falls apart at scale. So here's my thoughts on this. Just because in my mind as a practitioner, I hear centralized, it doesn't necessarily mean one. Right? Like I might have an out-of-band identity provider that does do certain functions for admin or something to that nature, right? I've even had an MSP that uses two IDPs that are chained, one doing device-based methodology so we can scrape off the devices first, and then the second one doing identity-based. But we had talked about where maybe I wanted a couple different control planes and define them differently and have those in different IDPs, but I'm still centralizing all of those. I'm still using SSO, right? And I'm still having that. And then to your point, Eric, scary SSO outage, that's where you have to have break glass accounts and defined periods of carve out for break glass. We at Iconic had at day 2, we're carving this sign in out by this methodology. At day 4, we're pulling this out. And I understand the reason, and I may have triggered John, so go. Just go,
That's
John.
fine. I'm not triggered. I am going to say one thing though, like I am so intensely happy that we're having conversations about SSO and integration with SaaS products. And the reason why I love this is better. And let me explain why I think that this is better. If I'm working with Grammarly or I'm working with DocHub or I'm working with time tracking software for a law firm, it's in the cloud. That's it. I'm not dealing with 95 versions of that's installed on-prem. So as much as we kind of look at some of this stuff and we're like, yeah, this is kind of a pain in the butt, it's still better than it was where we would buy like time management software, install it on a server,
Amen.
and then have to maintain that server. And for
Name Bob.
MSP, having to build it up, maintaining, did they get a patch? Did they not get a patch?
Amen.
We're moving better, right? And I'm so happy that we're having these conversations because we joke about on-prem exchange, but that's just a manifestation of a much bigger problem
Amen.
that existed with tons of on-prem software.
I want to make one more point, Andrew, on this, and that is when we start looking at other controls like 6.7 and SCIM, if y'all are not familiar with SCIM, like SCIM bridging, the ability to actually send over group information before just-in-time need to other third-party SaaS softwares, it allows me to say, John Strand's in this group, and in that third-party platform, only give him these rights, not whether John selected something in a drop-down menu, right? It goes to this group and back-end control plane at the IDP. So in my argument, I think to your point of like, if we get everything to one SSO, then I have one master place to make that crafting and policy decision point. But anyways, go. Yeah, go. I'm good to cut off. Totally easy.
That's okay. No, I wanted to ask you guys one final question, starting with John. So you got, a bunch of MSPs and thank you guys all and gals for joining us today. I want to get going on account, at Control 5 today, John. What might be the top 2 or 3 recommendations you would have to start?
John's frozen.
John froze. How about you? Let's see. We'll start with you then, Matt. And if you want to bring up the bubbles, I don't, if that's helpful.
What was the question though? I'm sorry. I was paying attention to John being frozen.
That's okay. It is kind of weird how he is.
Yeah, it's great.
How he's like, that's it. But in terms of someone wanting to get going.
That was funny.
Oh.
It's Phyllis's darkness is spreading. So I just wanted to say that SSO outage doesn't scare me at all. And the reason why that SSO outage doesn't scare me at all is because if you have an SSO outage that goes out, then you're one customer, you're one victim in a sea of a whole bunch of other people that got hit by the same thing. And everybody is just like, well, I guess Microsoft was down.
This sucks. Damn you, Microsoft. Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it might suck. I mean, if you're looking at what happened with CrowdStrike, that was pretty bad. Where it's like actively nuking the ability to recover and restore your system. But I always look at things in terms of what is the narrative in the story. If I mess up and it's something that I built and I maintain, then I'm the one that has the sole responsibility. But if Google screws up, Microsoft screws up, Oracle screws up, Amazon screws up, I'm just another one in a sea of victims at that point.
John, before you lost power, did you hear my parting question, the last question I
missed it. I missed it. I don't know what's going on here. My whole internet blipped. I guess it got to like.
Is it how to get started, Andrew, in
literally
account management?
At 10 o'clock, everything just bounced. It's like, oh, we're going to reset the internet right now.
Yeah. So it was, John, the question was, for the MSPs listening about Control 5, what would be your top 2 or 3 recommendations to get going? And you certainly, Matt.
I'm going to say long passwords. This is my own personal opinion, and I hate saying it on a CIS session. Don't do the minimum. Yeah. Don't do the minimum. Go to 15 to 20. 20 is better for passwords. Let people do passphrases. It's more secure. It just is. That's number 1. Number 2, MFA everywhere. You have to move to MFA. Like the difference in the delta in organizations that have it and those that don't is just colossal, right? Like that step up and tech capability to break into those organizations that have MFA, it's just a steep wall that you've got to deal with. And then the third one, and this is the most important, audit and test the first 2. Make sure your passwords are long and make sure that you don't have some janky, weird API somewhere that allows me to completely bypass multi-factor authentication. Those are my 3.
Yep. I would go ahead, Andrew. Sorry.
I was just going to ask John, but what, with, and maybe this is off topic. If it is, let me know. But with all of the token harvest, the evil jinx token harvesting, like, what do you say to those? Like, I'm not saying we obviously still want MFA, but is that just user
No,
training?
no, no. It's the difference between breaching an account at a time and
Yeah.
somebody taking over hundreds or dozens of accounts. And this goes back to Matt's thing, right? If you have it completely wide open and exposed, you're attacked. There'll be no shelter here. The front line is everywhere. But if you
Yep.
can actually kind of lock that down to SSO, you can enable that, couple it with good long strong passphrases, multi-factor. I'm as an attacker doing 1Z, 2Z attacks. And what that
Loud.
forces me to do is to start there, and then I have to do crazy graph runner stuff. And that's a point where you can detect me, right? We're
Yep.
creating choke points in the environment, and it's more defendable choke points in the environment as well.
Which are just my points of how to get started. I think this is the one where if you're going to approach this, I would start by looking at each of my 2.1s, right? All my 2.1s, and say, what's sensitive? And start with the sensitive ones, right? What has access? What has large, what's the risk? And as I look at those 2.1s, ask what kind of accounts exist? Are they SSO? Are they manual passwords? Right? And start charting those and beginning down that path. Go ahead. Sorry, Andrew. Yeah.
So when we talk about control 2 Matt, do you throw SAS in there these days?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely.
And the reason I ask is because, historically, so I see Eric shaking his head too, which is great to hear because, historically it's right. It's more.
They thought of line of business and installed software. There's some evidence that needs to be cleared up on that. I think in 9 it needs to be clearer for that statement, but there is evidence. It says and URL, which you could interpret as where did I go download it to run it, but it also could mean this is the place where I go sign into stuff, right? Yeah, so SaaS is software. It's just not on your computer. Yeah, 100%.
Okay. No, good stuff. Any questions from folks out there? Okay, so Clint has one here. In the sea of MFA options, are there MFA types or applications that should be avoided, John?
I can take this.
Yeah, go.
Yeah, so that specific authentication for a PIN is at the specific device itself. And I kind of hate it, and I'm kind of okay with it.
Oh, we're about to get into a nice little argument. This is gonna be good.
Yeah, so and I'm really conflicted by it because I have
Same.
teenagers, and they absolutely saw what my PIN was. So that's probably the first thing against it. However, on like my computers, it's set up with the PIN and the facial recognition for like my wife's computer. So it's a little bit more difficult to get in. Of course, on my system that I'm sitting at right now, my youngest son can log into my computer with my fingerprint reader. I don't know why, but so I think it's like we keep trying to make things easier for users, and I'm sympathetic to that. But at the end of the day, I am computer security Mordak. I am the person that makes things more difficult for people. So I want things to be easier for users, but sometimes I think we go out of our way to make it too easy, and it's just going to bite us in the ass. Matt, your take.
I'm on this weird fence too, but I will say with TPM anti-hammering capabilities of Windows Hello on that device, I only get a certain number of shots at that pin before it shreds itself anyway. And that can be user administrator controlled. So that means that you can say, hey, it is something somebody must have this specific device, to John's point in the beginning, and that pin is in this specific device. Now, I know this one user named Matt who's an idiot, and he sometimes uses that pin on multiple different places for different devices, making it lose that capability that's there. So there's a downside to that too, where it might need to be stronger than 4 or 6 numbers. But I do think the user's convenience and security is at least now you have to watch someone and get that pin and steal that device from them, and they likely left it open anyway in the airport. So I'm going to steal it that way. I'm a fan.
Yeah. As long as your threat model doesn't involve your teenagers who can watch over your shoulder when you type it in constantly, you're going to be fine. Probably. Most
Short
likely.
answer is yes, I'm good with pins in that. I would tend to make them 6 to 8 characters long, at least, in my opinion. But yeah, pins for the win. Windows Hello. But back to the core of the question: is there certain things you should avoid or should do? Definitely do FIDO where you can, or passwordless where you can. Like absolutely,
Yes.
absolutely.
Going
Like,
back to
Jesus.
those sensitive users, I wish Phyllis was here. If you have admin and you have dev
You're
users,
using FIDO, baby.
force them to use FIDO. Yep.
We made you use FIDO in CA for Escalate. Like, you want to use an Azure control policy and create VMs? Not without a FIDO sign in first. So you can be selective. They don't always have to do it, but remember that Windows Hello does come in the compendium of FIDO. It is a primary refresh token and a token generating and non-signing capability right there. So you do have FIDO that can't be captured in the middle. That's the big benefit of FIDO. AITM is not possible. You can harvest it and replay it, but you just can't AITM it. Right, so that's huge. But then they just move on to device code flows, right? And FIDO doesn't protect you against a device code flow because you're device code flowing with Microsoft. So it's always going to change.
Together, just hanging, flowing. It's fine. It's fine.
John, I used GraphRunner in my boot camp and showed off stealing WordPress creds and injecting code for killing millions of Americans with GraphRunner. So I'm blaming that on you.
What's wrong with you?
I have problems. Anyways.
All right. Any other questions or comments, Addie? I thought this was great as always, Matt. John, thanks, and Phyllis, even though she has left us. Questions from you guys and gals? No. All right. Well, with that, John, have a fantastic time in Germany. How long are you there?
I think I'm here for like a week and a half. I've got meetings all over the place. I'm in Brussels. I'm in Ghent. I don't know. I've got a lot of places I'm going to be. So.
Can you take a quick call after, by the way?
Sure, not a problem.
Matt, have a great weekend. Everybody out there, thanks, Eric, as always. Woodard, thank you for jumping on and giving perspective. Wishing you all a great one. We'll get together again in 2 weeks. And until then, hope to see you guys on Monday's call with Phil Langlois about from the Verizon data breach report. The principal author will be joining us at 1 p.m. So until then, have an awesome one. And Matt, by the way, we have an open seat if you want to be. We have, let's see, who do we have? Wes, Phyllis, if you want to come on
Next Monday?
This Monday coming up.
Yeah, as long I think I'm done flying by that. Just shoot me a private message. I'd love to join. All right.
All right.
Thanks.
Sounds good. See you guys. Thanks, everybody.